Welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, working to minimize wildfire-related deaths and property. I'm still working that out, uh, but that's the basic idea, right? And in along the way, I'm trying to enlist the resources of all of the really smart people on this planet, people way smarter than me. And one of those people is right here with us today. I've got Grady Joseph, who has a wealth of experience in emergency management. Welcome to the Fire Break.
Thanks, Steve. It's so great to be here with you today.
Well, I hope it will be. Well, that has yet to be seen. But I think it will be because I'm so fascinated by your career and what you've done. Would you walk us through that a little bit, having worked with FEMA, with the governor's emergency office, running your own private company as CEO of Disaster IO? I mean, you've been there, done that. Tell us a little bit how your career unfolded,
Yeah, absolutely.
whether by choice or by luck.
A little bit of both. So I began my emergency management career, fortunate to join the industry when I was quite young. So right out of college, moved to Washington, D.C. and joined FEMA headquarters, where I helped to stand up a brand new team that was bringing, using mobile technology to bring services to disaster survivors. Really stood up after Hurricane Sandy and the response to that, catastrophic event that, really destroyed New York City and broader portions of the East Coast. And so, spent a number of years at FEMA headquarters working for the assistant administrator for recovery and two major programs that help communities after disasters, the individual assistance program and the public assistance program, which rebuilds infrastructure and helps communities cover the costs associated with those response activities. From there, had an opportunity to join a major technology modernization initiative with FEMA, and we were really focused on simplifying the experience of communities who have been impacted by disasters. And so that brought me back home to California, where I was born and raised, and we moved to the Bay Area. My wonderful supportive wife has gone all over the country with me. And so throughout that time, really traveled around the country, working with both first responders and emergency managers in states all around for a variety of incidents, from hurricanes to floods to fires to earthquakes. And really at the passion there is how do we improve the way that we do business, bring the latest technologies and tools to bear to make those operations more efficient, more effective, and ultimately change outcomes for communities. From there, I left FEMA and spent some time in Florida after Hurricane Irma, helping lead the recovery efforts down there. And then got a call from a good friend one day who asked me if I would join him in coming to California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. And so I led the disaster recovery team there as the assistant director. And about 9 months later, COVID hit, and I was detailed to lead the COVID-19 logistics task force, which was not something that I had done in the past, but you understand the principles and the frameworks of emergency management, and the ability to solve problems, think critically, and really dig into complex issues. And so spent the next several years leading that response, buying PPE, standing up supply chains from China back to the US when we had the big supply chain crunches, building mobile field hospitals. And then all the while, we were also responding to some of the largest wildfire outbreaks that the state had ever experienced. We had civil unrest after the George Floyd incident and the subsequent protests that occurred there. So it was a really busy time. And about a year ago, I decided to leave Cal OES, mostly for personal reasons. My wife and I had been going back and forth between Sacramento and San Francisco for about 4 years at that point. And, after so much time, it's challenging on relationships, and this industry just inherently is that. But joined the private sector and been supporting local governments and their disaster response and recovery initiatives ever since, from the catastrophic flooding that California experienced last year to the Maui wildfires. And again, really focused on how do I identify new tools, new technologies that we can bring to bear to really improve that entire process and help communities become more resilient through rapid response and rapid recovery.
Wow. Wow. Let's focus on the most important part of what you said, uh, how work was impacting your relationship with your wife. And right, like in the big scheme of things, your primary relationship is going to have the biggest influence on the flavor of whether this was a good life or not. Even though you might have helped millions of people along the way, your wife says, "Hey, I come first," and if you don't agree with her, then you come last, right? So, uh, the
Definitely.
reason I brought that up, like in all seriousness, is that what you do at work is stressful, and that impacts your home life. And then when your home life isn't going well, to what degree do you find that impacts your work capacity?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my wife is also a entrepreneur and business owner, and so from the really beginning of our relationship, we've had a fantastic understanding, and she's been so supportive of my career throughout. I'm really, an adrenaline junkie at heart. I like to run into the fire. I want to be in the scenarios where there's tough problems to work on, and quite frankly, I get a little bit bored, a little stir crazy if there's not something challenging, a little chaotic going on. So, um, you know, you always got to take time to make sure that you're thinking about yourself. And, that's one of the things that we preach is you have to be able to take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. And those relationships that are close to you are key to making sure that you've got folks around you who are checking you and making sure that they're forcing you to have some downtime when you need to, whether that be your wife, saying, "Hey, we need to go on a long weekend and get away from everything and unplug a little bit." Those are all really key. And so, quite frankly, I couldn't do what I do today and couldn't have had the experiences that I've had without the support and backing and constant reassurance of my wonderful wife, Tyler. So,
Good.
it's a really, really fantastic partnership that we have there. And yeah, there's lots of challenges, of course, with distance and lots of travel and things like that. But making sure you're prioritizing those personal relationships and your own mental well-being is incredibly important to continue to do what we do.
Right, because you've got to be, what do they call it? It affects how you show up at work, right? What your awareness levels are, how much of your brain is free for processing what's going on with this emergency, because more or less of it is taken up by what's going on at home. So I really want to
Yeah,
stress that because we're seeing mass casualties, I would say, as a result of the PTSD experiences that people get when they deal with these tragedies, day in, day out for a living.
absolutely.
So, like, we don't want to see more firefighter suicides and emergency worker suicides because the stress was just too great and the support system was too small. Uh,
Absolutely. And there's really been a culture that's been shifting over the last several years, but certainly when I first got into the business, there's this culture of, go, 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 go. The mission is more important than yourself. And, I was having a conversation with a close friend of mine just this morning. He's, running a large response and recovery operation in the country right now and just really exhausted mentally, right? And we were talking a little bit and had to remind him that you have all these people depending on you to make decisions, to give guidance, right? And if you're putting in 16 hours but you're only at 50% capacity because you're exhausted and stressed out, if you take that break and step back, putting in 8 hours at 100% is going to deliver far better results for your team and ultimately for the communities that you're there to support than if you're exhausted and not able to think clearly, not able to problem solve rapidly and move through the, consequence management components of the business. And so, really making sure that we're reiterating and continuing to evolve that culture in both emergency management and public safety writ large is so important because people really do forget that as you're degraded mentally, that has negative ramifications for the folks that we're trying to support. And making sure that you're there and exercising, eating well, getting sleep, right, is so important to
It's
making
key.
sure that we're doing the right things.
Yeah, it's key, and it's often overlooked, and we can't really, we shouldn't take it for granted, because it
Absolutely.
impacts. I am the same adrenaline junkie. Want to be where I can be of help, solving an important problem. You know, the the minute I turned 18, I jumped right into the first EMT class I could find, and the next day I responded to the Pan Am Flight 759 crash with more than 100 people dead, and spent days, we sifted through rubble looking for survivors. And then, the word, the PTSD hadn't been coined yet, right? So it's like, you're acting a little funky. Get your head straight and get into work here, right? And, it was months and months before things started to feel normal between my ears.
Yeah.
Um, and right. So, I'm sorry to any of the patients I treated during that time phase. Sorry, my mind was elsewhere. Yeah, but
Um,
so I wanted to bring that up as just as a really important point, and I'm glad that culture is shifting. Uh, do
slowly but surely.
yeah,
Definitely in the last 5 years or so, we've seen a lot more emphasis on that. Still a lot of work to do, but at least the good thing is that the science has really caught up, and the understanding of how those impacts ultimately on the mission, right?
yeah,
And
that's
making
right.
sure that we can continue to do that work because once again, right, the age old motto: if you can't if you're not well taken care of yourself, then you can't show up well for the communities you're there to support.
Yes, and probably, and we'll move on, but probably a lot of that has to do with turnover, because I think some of the feelings about don't be a wuss, get to work, um, are generational, and they run deep. And crusty old guys who believe this is probably gonna, they might look at the science or whatever, but you're not really, and you might change the behavior, but you're really not changing the underlying thinking. you know
Mm-hmm.
Kids today are just too soft and blah blah blah, whatever, right? But as those kids take over those jobs, then the entire culture shifts, right? And then we see people with a greater level of understanding and compassion in the leadership roles. I'm guessing that's what the big sea change would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really that generational shift, has been taking place. When I got into emergency management at the ripe young age at 23, there was something like 3% of the federal workforce was under the age of 30, right?
Yeah,
And so over the years, as folks have retired and moved on, the inability of the public sector at large to fill those positions because of some of those cultural challenges is really forcing that, right? And as we continue through that transition, it really just becomes incumbent upon the agencies who are recruiting and have these huge vacancy rates, right? We're seeing anywhere from 25 to 40% vacancy rates across the board. Doesn't matter where you go, state, federal, local. Just having a really hard time recruiting and retaining talent. Sometimes driven by that culture, sometimes driven by other factors. But the workplace, the health of the workplace, and the mental health and whatnot is certainly going to be an important factor for folks to consider as we move forward and try to bring the next generation of emergency managers and public safety professionals into the business.
and I'm guessing that not enough emergency managers, is in itself an emergency, right? When there's no one to run the disaster. Um, with regard to how many boots you got on the ground, I'm personally hoping that the most hazardous of those jobs will be replaced with firefighting robots, where that can be sent into environments where just people shouldn't be. Are you seeing any movement in the industry towards that, and also towards AI and decision support?
Absolutely. I think we're really early days on the AI and decision support pieces, but there's a lot of new technologies coming about that are going to be enabling that. Robotics has been a big component that's been pushing into certainly fire and law enforcement for a number of years, especially as some of those capabilities trickled out of the Department of Defense and became more accessible to local agencies with smaller, tighter budgets. And so those high hazard areas are really the spots where we're seeing a lot of growth in those. I think there's a long way to go. While they're very useful, they're kind of dumb machines that are mostly controlled by humans, right? And so the next phase of that is really going to be incorporating that intelligence to allow these machines to operate in a more autonomous manner, disconnected environments, right? We're seeing a lot of progress in that. And, really just from a basic perspective, using technology as a force multiplier. We know that we don't have enough people to address certainly like the maximum of maximum events, right? So you think about a large earthquake in Southern California along the San Andreas Fault. There's not enough first responders and emergency managers in the country to really deal with some of those things that are in the catastrophic plans throughout the country. And so it really becomes all that more important to modernize, bring in new technologies, whether it be remote sensing or just simple things like back office automation, right? I think people really underestimate, the simple kind of administrative things that take a lot of people to continue to move the gears of these agencies, get people paid, move resources, all that sort of stuff. And so there's a lot of low hanging fruit that's not necessarily even high tech, but really just by automating and introducing more, of the latest technology there, we free up those individuals to do more value added work, right? So instead of moving paper from, one location to another and filling out spreadsheets and doing things like that, those folks can now be in the field interacting with survivors, thinking critically about how we're going to deploy solutions and resources to the right area to meet the needs of the folks on the ground, and really be able to more intelligently understand what those needs are rapidly, right? And so, over the next 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to see some really incredible leaps in that space, and especially around integration, right? So emergency management is a particularly interesting space, and public safety as well, because emergency management organizations tend to be quite small and they rely on the other agencies around them to really be the boots on the ground and to be the tip of the spear, if you will. And so in government, that introduces challenges with interoperability, right? So in your normal kind of blue skies environment, all of these organizations are quite siloed, and they've got just as simple as their own email services, right? And so when you think about bringing all of them together under really challenging circumstances, black sky situations, now you have to have all these technology systems kind of working together, and the traditional kind of methodology there has just been to throw humans at it. But there's going to be a real opportunity here coming forward, especially with the developments in artificial intelligence, to sync all those systems together and have that provide a more comprehensive common operating picture that goes across agencies, across jurisdictions, whether you have FEMA and Cal OES and the counties all engaged in a response initiative. Not only the people coming together organizationally to work, that process through the incident command system has been tried and proven through the fire service for decades, but we really don't have that same framework for technology. How do you bring all these agencies together and quickly kind of integrate and work across these technology silos to deliver services and support and resources to the communities that need them most? So really, really exciting times on that front. And we're helping agencies build that framework so that as the capabilities progress in that space, they're able to take advantage of that immediately and grow their ability to rapidly support, efficiently support, with the kind of latest and greatest tools.
Yeah, right. I show up with my VHF radio, and you're operating on an 800 trunking system.
Exactly.
Nothing's not going to work there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
and I can't believe that problem started 20 years ago, and it's still a problem, right? So
Government's hard. It's
the pace is right. So how do you explain? Like, so I'm not sure that a lot of people understand what an emergency manager does. I mean, yeah, yes, you manage an emergency, but you're not the fire marshal, you're not the police chief, you're not flying the helicopter. So could you explain, like, both for the public and for people who hold those incident command positions? Because if it's a fire, and you're tell the incident commander, well, I'm here to support you, like, okay, well, what fire resources are you bringing to me? Okay, well, then get out of my
Yeah,
trailer, right? So how do you explain the value of what you do, and that it's integral, but it's very behind the scenes?
absolutely. So yeah, we kind of colloquially refer to ourselves as second responders. The fire and law enforcement is there first on the scene, stabilizing it, and really focused on the incident itself, right? So, but
Yeah.
as you have, let's use a campaign fire for an example, right? In California, Cal Fire is going to be kind of tip of the spear. They're going to deliver air attack, and then as that grows and shifts into different jurisdictions, you may have the U.S. Forest Service come in, right? And I'll use Cal OES for this example, but Cal OES is the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, is there to coordinate mutual aid. So we do make sure that we're bringing resources, understanding where the gaps are, where the issues are on the ground, and coordinate additional responding jurisdictions. So if that's bringing a strike team from LA County Fire up to Northern California to support that incident commander, and making sure that we understand what the gaps are and what the resource needs are, and two, we're going out and finding those. And so the emergency management organizations are almost always the entity that's coordinating directly with FEMA to bring in additional federal resources, whether that be activating the National Guard, activating DoD, bringing in assets from across state lines. And then also looking across the full spectrum, because these incidents, when you evacuate large numbers of people, you've got folks in shelters, you've got feeding needs, you've got all the different component parts that need to happen in order to make sure that we're supporting the community as that incident is ongoing. And so our role is really to be the connective tissue across all the different agencies that have a piece to play in that. So you have fire and law enforcement, but you also have health and human services. You have agriculture for large animal sheltering, right? And all these different agencies, public health for infectious disease outbreaks. And the emergency managers are really trained to be the connective tissue across all those folks who don't work together normally on a day-to-day basis. So we're the folks who are trained in that ability to reach out, bring the right people to the table, find those subject matter experts, and help solve those problems. So the incident commander can focus on the task at hand, right? Stabilizing the situation, responding to the actual needs of the incident. And we're there to back them up and make sure that they have everything that they need to do in order to make that happen.
Fascinating work, and very complex, no doubt. You have to be like a living Google Translate, because agencies, even when they're talking about the same need, have different vocabulary. Right? If you're in California and you request a tanker, you're talking about a large airplane full of retardant. You're on the East Coast, you ask for a tanker, you're asking for a truck full of water to come refill your truck. So it, you're nodding and laughing. So I'm guessing you're
Yep.
seeing this and having to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just like the fire service or law enforcement, right? We train on the incident command system, making sure you've got those flexible organizational structures. FEMA really provides a lot of the kind of nationwide guidance through the national incident management system, and how cross state and federal resources come to play there. And so it's really about making sure that you're leveraging those frameworks, that your teams are deeply trained and understand how to make those things happen. I think there's some gaps in the industry writ large has really focused on those kind of people-based and resource-based frameworks. We focus less on how do we use the latest data and remote sensing technologies to inform the planning process and making sure that the operations teams know exactly what's coming down the pipeline, right? Predictive analytics. How do we, bring all these different sources together to understand A, what the needs are, B, what we think the needs are going to be into the future, and marshal, what's available to be able to support those needs. And so there's some more, things to do on that front, and the industry is continuing to professionalize and kind of drive down the technology side of things. But I think there's been a lot of decades of work, really started in California in the 1950s, of how you do kind of that mutual aid component. And now this next phase of that is really going to be focused on the technology, and how do we bring technology to bear, integrate that across jurisdictions, across state lines, build data frameworks and models so that you can have that interoperability across systems.
I think it's going to be a whole new ball game, because ICS paperwork, that is not seen as a tool to help you make better decisions, and right, that's something else you have to do, and most people do it post incident. So you know, not exactly what's needed. But the big focus on technology, um, not only the generation of data, but actionable suggestions from that data, I think, you know, will be the provenance of AI, right? The idea, like, if we just keep throwing more data into the incident command truck, we're going to get better and better answers, and it's just not so. I mean, the humans overload pretty easily. What do you think are the really promising technologies of the future?
Absolutely. And, just to elaborate on that point, right? We've had drones around for years and years, right? And, folks for, probably a decade and saying, well, why aren't you just using drones to do this, right? And my answer and my retort to that was always, well, who's going to comb through all the data and all the imagery that drone generates? The folks that we generally have at our disposal are, some of them are extremely, technically aware and capable, and others are not, right? You have this wide variety of comfort with modern technology. And so a lot of the times in the past, what we've really just been doing with these different tech platforms and tools is generating a bigger haystack. Right, but you still have to have somebody manually go through and find all those needles and derive that information to understand what's actionable and how we're going to do that. And the more data that you have, the less feasible that becomes, and it essentially just becomes easier to throw it off to the side and focus on what we know, which is using humans to develop ground truth and intelligence, and kind of feeding that back into PDF reports at the end of the day, right?
Right.
And so really what we're seeing with developments in machine learning and really these large language models that are coming out from whether it be OpenAI or any number of the other folks who are building these models, is those are giving us the opportunity to ingest data multimodally. So it could be anything from a drone that is feeding back real-time full motion video or creating 3D models of an impact area. And those tools are now able, through computer vision, to pick out the things that it thinks are important and can feed that to humans. So we're cutting down the amount of information that needs to be sorted through, and really we can just kind of focus on those nuggets that the tools are identifying. With large language models, unlocking all of the information and the knowledge that's been stored in 6-inch 3-ring binders, right? The catastrophic
Yes.
plans for California are 450 pages long, right?
Right.
Fantastic before bed reading. And but unless you've been in the industry for 20 years, right, there's not a lot of way for people to ingest that much information and make actionable decisions on that. But where we're going is going to be the ability to upload all of that information that's been locked up in documents and ingest, the intelligence that's coming out from all these sensor platforms, and have these tools provide decision support recommendations. Hey, we
Yes.
see X, Y, and Z. Your
Yep.
catastrophic plan says that this is the assumptions, and if this happens, do these things. Would you like to order a truckload of sheltering supplies to go to this location, right? And as we continue to modernize systems in emergency management and public safety, we're going to be generating more actionable data. So the PDFs and all that information that's locked up, in 3-ring binders today is fantastic. But the real place that you want to go with that is away from a, ICS 213 activity log and
Right.
to a mobile application that allows you to capture that data in real time, machine readable. It's been designed to be incredibly intuitive for first responder use, right? That's what I always say to my team is like, can you use this tool with gloves on the hood of a car while it's pouring rain? Because if
Right.
you can't do that, then we might as well scrap it. It's too hard.
Yeah.
It's not going to work, right? We
Right.
want to make it easier and more intuitive for first responders and emergency managers to use these platforms and to get that information and make actionable decisions off of that, and really decrease the cognitive burden, right? People really
That's right.
underestimate how much mental time and energy and bandwidth that it takes to navigate some of these legacy tools. And simple things like user experience are just so incredibly important to allowing operators to focus on the mission at hand, let that technology kind of drift off into the background, and be constantly kind of monitoring and supporting and making recommendations, asking questions, right? Feeding in
Right.
additional information so that we've got more intelligence to be able to support further decision making into the future. So it's really, really exciting times for all these technologies coming together at the same point.
Uh, I was so happy, like the way you just described that, because I've spent the last year, building out a patent on a program called Deep Red, and it's exactly what you described, right? That you have an AI that is fed sensor data in real time. The AI
Mm-hmm.
has been trained on all of the siloed information that's held around the world about the best ways to put out fires. The AI understands what the physical capacities of every asset are. This plane can do this truck can do that, this bulldozer does this. With the bulldozer, we can cover X number of feet, blah, 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 blah. And then it queries you, right? So it knows what the situation is from the data. It knows how to what the data means because of its training. It asks you what your resources are, and it could do that by querying the local computer-aided dispatch systems to see what resources are available. It knows through mapping and what the assets in the area are. It knows by fire prediction models where the fire's heading next and which values are at risk. And then it says, based on the tools that you have to work with, oh, I just checked out 1 million ways you could do this, and here's what you should do, right? This plane should drop on that hill. This dozer should push here. These 300 guys should push there. 6 hours from now, someone should bring lunch to those guys. And by the way, 3 vegan meals, 2 kosher meals, and 1 gluten-free, right? They like all of these things that take so much manual work, thousands and thousands of reams of paper, really could be well handled in an AI if it was properly integrated. And that's so we have, I think, the same dream for where AI will save lives and make this job a lot easier.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that philosophy more. I think there's so much opportunity there, and there's again, going back to that point, it's how do you know where your resources are, right? Unless the fire department is using a tracking system for their assets where they've got real-time GPS locations. Many of them are adopting that, but it's those little unlocks where if you don't have that, you need that. And then that
yeah,
becomes a new data stream that feeds into the model to be able to ingest that, understand where those resources are, who the closest is, what their capability and capacity is, and how that figures into the attack strategy for stabilizing that incident. So it's
yeah.
really fantastic, exciting times.
So I think the firefighters, and I'm going to focus on them because that's our focus. But firefighters will tell you if a tool is good or if it sucks, how easily it can be broken, how much utility it had for them, and even give you feedback about how the tool could be made better based on their usage of it, right? Um, However, full-time firefighters are not, in most likely cases, going to be the person who invents and innovates that technology. That technology is going to come from the private sector, right? The private sector will come in the forms of innovators who will then become vendors. And the process by which innovation is ingested into the fire service kills most of the innovation that's offered. And so I'd love for you to speak to the path to commercialization that makes better tools available to emergency workers, because it seems extremely convoluted and great ideas die because departments don't have a way, they don't have, nobody is in charge of ingesting new technology, new tools. And, it reminds me of that old cartoon of the salesman with a belt-fed M60 machine gun, trying to get Napoleon's attention. And he's told, look, we're fighting a war right now. I don't have time to talk to a salesman.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the private sector is absolutely critical to thinking up the kind of from first principles ways that we can better support first responders and emergency managers, and fire is a fantastic example. Some of the best platforms, right? It really requires, I think, the ability for the private sector to deeply understand the reality of these departments and the culture, the
Mm-hmm.
business processes associated with how they operate. My experience, certainly, being, over a decade in the public sector and having all sorts of vendors come to me, it was it was always very clear which ones of them were just trying to sell me something
Right.
without having a deep understanding of my problem set and speaking the language of emergency management and public safety, and which ones took the time to either hire or partner with folks who had been in the industry and could really relate, not just the problem sets, but also kind of the cultural barriers to adoption, right? And, some of my great friends came from the fire service, and they have a hilarious saying. It's firefighters hate two things. One is the way things are, and two is change.
That's right.
And
Yes.
so, really making sure that you're thinking about that adoption strategy and how those solutions get implemented in a way that is quick. They don't have time for a 12-month system integration life cycle, right? So you really have to think about these things from first principles, understand what the technology environment that the different departments have is, and make sure that you're tailoring your approach and your solution to fit within that broader ecosystem. So if you're coming in to provide an AI solution, but you don't have an understanding of what their CAD system is, what their vehicle tracking technology looks like, how they're doing all of their reports and generating their after actions, or the dispatch, right? You're just going to have an uphill battle to get that understanding. So I really encourage folks to take the time and to really understand the needs and the environment that your customers operate in. And then, on the actual go-to-market strategy, folks really, especially coming from a enterprise environment where they're used to selling their tool to other businesses, are just mind blown by the procurement process in government, right?
Right.
And that is just such an important piece of doing business with the public sector that folks really just think, hey, I can figure that out. But one of the first things that I would always ask when folks came to me with a particular solution, even if it met my needs, was, well, how do I do business with you? Are you on some sort of contract vehicle, right?
Are
So,
you in Viper or whatever?
yeah, Viper. Are you on a GSA schedule? California has the California Multiple Awards schedule, right? And if you're not on any of those and you haven't kind of done the pre-work to set your business up to make it easy and lower the barrier to entry to do business with you, then the procurement team, right? Even if the operators love it and it's a fantastic tool, the procurement team still is like that key cog in there because of the rules and regulations and policies in place at each of these locations. Uh, if they have to go out and do a full bore open RFP full competition, a lot of the times that's going to take 4 months just to set the RFP up. You've got to advertise it. You've got to get all the responses. You got to sit down and you got to go through everybody's and set the scoring criteria. Make sure that you didn't just do lowest cost bidder, but best value, and how you set all those things up. And most of the time, right, the operators don't have the actual time to sit with procurement to do those things, and so all of the pre-work that you can do by getting on contract vehicles or partnering with folks who are on those, and gives you a pathway into those organizations, and lowering that procurement life cycle is both good for the agency and the operator, because they can spend less time doing the paperwork and doing business with you, and more time focusing on implementing the solution, tailoring it, getting it right for the needs of the customer. And we're really having this conversation nationwide, right? Because every state and local kind of has a lot of these challenges, and you're really seeing it in real time with the Defense Department, right? And public safety usually is operating on a far slimmer budget than the Department of Defense.
For now.
And for now, and we love to see bigger investments on that front. But the case is today that there's not multi-billion-dollar R&D budgets for emerging technologies just to kind of play around with things. A lot of this really flows down from a lot of the research that's done by DoD and NIST. And you've seen companies like new age defense tech companies like Anduril or Palantir have really been beating this drum on this, and fighting the battle with the DoD's procurement machine, and having some incremental wins, still a long way to go, but they've certainly opened up the conversation about reforming these areas and making it easier for government to do business with startups, right?
Right.
I think that's a real challenge, especially when you're trying to start a company, is how do you, without like a big track record and without millions of dollars of contract, how do you get from 0 to 1 on that, so that you can continue to offer your services to others? And so we're going to continue to have those conversations, but the fact of the matter today is that there are several things that companies can do to lower that burden and decrease that procurement lifecycle time, even without broader reforms coming into play.
Well, I was very fortunate to have anticipated some of those things. So I'd worked as a volunteer firefighter. I realized that pretty much everything we do doesn't do much. They did attacking a 200-foot wall of fire with medieval gardening tools is probably not going to have a lot of impact. That the wind really decided what happened to the fire, and that unless you could control the wind, or until you could control the wind, you're just playing around. So, my concept was, let's put jet engines onto big trucks and use them to blow retardant at big fires at 200 miles an hour, and that we could probably push some fires back. And then the next thing I surmised was that no one would listen to me, because I'm not a fire chief, I'm not in the club, and that firefighters will only buy from another firefighter. So, step 2, besides, after filing the IP, was partner with a fire chief and an emergency manager as co-founders on the company, because they would understand how to sell into the market. And in fact, they hate the word sell. How to provide a solution to people, the solution that people need, and exchange that for money. They're more comfortable that way, and they understand the procurement process and how painful that is, and amazingly slow. But that strategy seems to so far be getting us a launch, and getting us some decent funding to do some R&D. Which, as you said, is really rare, right? It's just hard to find R&D money for this until you have a customer. in this business, no one was going to be a customer until you have technology that you could show them that works. So
Absolutely.
so so it looks like everything is kind of set up against um, new technology coming to the industry. And it looks like, for the most part, you'll get the military's leftovers, right? You'll get GPS because we needed it to do Desert Storm, right? You know you'll get the hen nozzle because pressure washers had that technology 70 years ago, right? Oh wow, you can put this thing on and you can make it a cone or a fan. Whoa. And like, if you follow I'm sure you do, the LinkedIn posts of people raving about different things, you're like, oh my God, haven't other industries had this for like a decade, or a century? So right,
Yeah.
right, 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think,
So,
that's something that we really try to do is, understand what those kind of cutting edge capabilities are.
hmm
Oftentimes just for the reality of it, those are driven by, DoD needs, right? And Homeland
right.
Security types of needs. And, how do we take those tools and package them in a way that meets the needs of emergency management organizations, right? So,
Yeah.
you always have folks who just say, hey, just pull it right off the battlefield and put it into a emergency management or public safety context, and they really forget that when you're fighting a war overseas, privacy requirements are significantly different than when you're
Right.
operating in a domestic environment. When you're a humanitarian organization trying to support communities, the things that warfighters need really don't translate well, and often give folks a bad taste in their mouth. Just that's bringing some of those, even if they're benign, right? Just the
Right.
fact that it came from that side can be challenging, and so we want to strip those things out, bring in, the latest and greatest in satellite imagery and remote sensing tools, and really, again, focusing on the human centered design and making things incredibly intuitive. Because if there's one thing the defense primes are not known for, is having easy to use and
Heads up
sophisticated
display with
software.
200 pieces of data on it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And takes 100 clicks in order to do something that should take three, right? And
Right.
and so the needs of our service members are similar from that perspective, but we find that there's a huge opportunity just to focus on elegantly tying those things together, building intuitive user experiences that again allow folks to focus on solving the problems at hand, not pulling out the three-ring grinder to figure out the instructions on how to work the software, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's all incredibly important stuff to keep front of mind.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're cautioning the emergency space from doing what the law enforcement space did, because in law enforcement they literally just wanted the same tools. Hey, you guys got full auto HKMP5s, we want them too. You guys got tanks, we want them too. And that created this appearance that the police department is, a local branch of the military, which, in many cases just doesn't play well. In terms of actual playing with tools, toys, super awesome, right? To get to play with the big boy toys. But I don't think the difference, right, being that when we go to fight overseas, there's like a presumption of guilt, right? This person needs to get shot, blown up, bombed, whatever. And here, it's a presumption of innocence. And so to go in with the tools of warfare doesn't play well with the Constitution, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And we really want our folks to be, especially working in California, right? We've got large populations of undocumented immigrants who may or may not have legal status, and so that adds additional layers of consideration that you really want to think through as you're developing or attempting to acquire technology, because at the end of the day, right, we're there to serve everybody in their time of need, regardless of race, creed, anything else. And so
right.
making sure that privacy is really being respected, and we're not using data for anything other than its intended purpose, and making sure that the cybersecurity components and data security components are really locked down, and only folks who need to have access to certain things have that access is incredibly important for building that community trust and making sure that when something happens, that folks aren't scared to go to a shelter because of some technology platform that might be used, right? We want to make sure that folks feel comfortable, as comfortable as they can in a disaster environment. So I think it's important to have purpose-built tools and platforms to meet that need, because just foundationally there's some real differences there. So, what are the kind of emerging capabilities, and then how do you kind of package those in the way that respects civil liberties and privacy and ensures the safety, mental safety of the community,
Yes.
as well as the physical safety, right? So you're seeing,
Yeah. So
companies
yeah.
are doing this, which is fantastic to see.
So you're saying it's important to help people maintain the illusion that they actually have any privacy.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, because
I mean, I think it's
if
different.
with the right keyboard and like nobody has privacy, you can find out everything about anybody. But certainly you have to go in with the premise that this is going to help protect your whatever's left of your privacy. So let me ask you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, I think people forget that when they, log into the Facebook app on their phone, right? It's got, XYZ coordinates of their location, and all their interactions with friends and family and things like that are being tracked. But there is, fortunately or unfortunately, a different standard for government. I think, folks generally feel like they're giving their data up to those types of services for some sort of benefit in return. And, unfortunately, over the decades, I think a bit of public trust has been lost by our public
Mm-hmm.
safety, public sector organizations. And so, regardless of your opinion on that, it is the reality that we live in. And so making sure that we're being, forthright and really keeping those concerns and considerations top of mind is really going to help us rebuild that trust and
Yes.
make sure that there's, that safety and security within communities.
Yeah, because the perception is really, unfortunately, what has to drive it, right? A fact is a fact, but perception is reality.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like you're lined up to deal with that. So let me, while I got you here, I can ask you some advice. I'm thinking of a strategy. Would it make sense for a startup developing equipment in the emergency space to focus on finding a way that serves the needs of the DoD first, because then you will get funding, and then you can develop that technology, and then you can sell it into emergency services?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of companies have seen a lot of success with that very strategy, and kind of taking a dual prong approach where you're developing some, technology or hardware for a domestic use case, but there's a compelling use case on the defense side. And so you see, entities like the Defense Innovation Unit or the SBIR grant programs really funding some of those emerging technologies and platforms. Just because of the size of their budgets, they've got the ability to support that. And I think for folks who want to work in public safety, want to develop solutions for public safety, that makes a ton of sense. If you can get a few $100,000, $500,000 in non-dilutive capital as a grant
Yep.
to experiment with some things, that's far better than taking $500,000 from a venture capital fund that's going to take 25% equity in your company at the same time, right? So
Yeah.
the nice thing about having the government as a partner, regardless of the bureaucracy and some of the challenges that comes with that, is they fundamentally just want to see good outcomes, and are not trying to necessarily join your board and tell you how to run your company. So I think
You
that's
sound like you're
it's a
speaking
great option.
from firsthand experience. I'm guessing this is when you tried to translate tried, and I don't mean unsuccessfully, but when you went about the goal of taking your vast experience in emergency management and starting a company providing services, right, with Disaster IO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. And we,
what was your takeaway on that? What's the status of that, and how do you feel
yeah,
about it?
so we have not gone down the DoD route as of yet. I have number of friends and colleagues who have started companies and have found good success there and some middling success there as well. But they generally speaking have good things to say about the Department of Defense as a funding partner and a research partner. So that's not firsthand experience; it's secondhand, but I was pretty close to some of those conversations. So,
Okay.
but Disasters IO was really founded to build technology solutions that I didn't see in the market and that we really wanted to see when I was in government. And so, we started out building some solutions around the disaster recovery space. It's a highly bureaucratic process. My kind of go-to saying is that it's not a disaster until FEMA gets there, and that is because of the incredibly stringent rules, regulations, and bureaucracy that they put in place for folks. And it regularly takes a year or more for folks to secure the funding from those events that happened far in the past. And so, going back to, kind of the large language models and what AI is going to be able to bring, we're hyper focused on helping communities rapidly recover from disasters, secure that funding, build a strategy to mitigate, the damage that was caused to their infrastructure and build more resilient communities through that process. And so we're working with a number of local government partners right now on what exactly are your needs, making sure that the tools are useful for the public works guy who's in the field and pouring rain, and he can submit his activity logs for the day, capture damage, understand what that intelligence looked like, and we're going to continue to build upon that and expand from there with that foundation of human-centered design, intuitive systems that are interoperable, right? So we're really building a platform that doesn't do everything. The goal is not to do everything, but the goal is to make sure that we can ingest information from many other places and provide that extensibility. Because at the end of the day, all these things funnel into recovery, and we believe that making that process simpler and more effective is really key to helping communities get back up on their feet.
And it sounds like the pace of things is a great place for misalignment of the character traits of founders versus those in government, right? That you think a day is 24 hours, but on Saturn, right? In Saturn, a year is 800 and something days, right? So you really do
Tough
have
point.
to adjust. Unless you're selling water to someone who's spraying water on a fire, you really need to adjust, your expectations of how quickly things will, no, of how slowly things will go. And I know,
Oh,
as
absolutely. I
founders,
mean,
right, we everything should have happened yesterday, and it's something that takes 6 months should have taken 2 months.
100%. I think that's
Yeah,
the, I always try to zoom out and, listen to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books about,
yeah,
different folks' experience. Because, I've spent, the first part of my career in government and was fortunate to get a lot of different experience of how different levels of government work together, how they function internally, right? And bring that knowledge to bear. But I'm a first time founder, right? So making sure that I'm checking myself, because even in government, right, I always was one of the individuals driving, right, really trying to kind of move the Overton window on expectations and getting things done more rapidly than we possibly could. And, was quite successful at doing that and kind of pulling the levers of bureaucracy to make things happen. And, really in like the founder role now and building solutions for the very same folks, I'm always trying to find those individuals in every organization who's got that same mentality and wants to get stuff done, because once you can find that individual or individuals and really, lay out the value proposition for what you're proposing, things can happen, pretty quickly. And then it even goes back to, thinking through how are people going to uh, do business with us or engage with us, right? Like what contract vehicles are you on? What partners do you have? If you're a small company, you probably need to team up with a larger prime and do some subcontracting, right? So kind of how are you thinking about not just your solution, but also how the people who need it get access to it, right? And making sure that you've got
Yeah.
a comprehensive view of that.
What a lot of work to do. I noticed you were able to get away with saying, it's not a disaster until FEMA gets there. So, and I'm sure you had similar experiences with most of the agencies that you hope to sell to. How do you walk that line where, people who, agencies that might deserve that attitude, you just got to bite your tongue because you know that one day you want them to be your customer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't say that in a, I have many, many phenomenal friends. Some of my best
Sure.
friends work for FEMA and in these organizations, right? And so I say that tongue in cheek
I'm
because,
laughing with
you
you,
know,
not at you. Right.
yeah, exactly. And they know too, right? If you go talk
Yeah.
to folks at various levels of government, hey, this is messed up, man. Like, or woman, like, why can't we adjust this regulation, or why is this policy the way that it is, right? And I think going back to my time at FEMA headquarters, they're not writing policy and putting programs in place just for, California. They're having
Right.
to deal with all hazards across the entire country. Oh, and by the way, everything from, Guam to
Yeah.
USVI to, the outer
Right.
islands, right? And so, um, that's a hard position to be in from a policy and programmatic design perspective. I do
Sure.
think that over the years, folks have moved from a presumption of innocence until proven guilty to a guilty until you prove that you're innocent. And I think
Mhm.
that that's an unfortunate development for the kind of bureaucracy writ large. And honestly, a lot of the challenges that we have in the space just comes down to, personnel who are not properly trained and don't have the time to get up to speed on quite complex programs. And so, where the rubber meets the road, you got the person in the field, working with a local government. They don't always have the best understanding of, the intention of the program and how, the things are supposed to go, what the vision was there. And so it's just a lot of moving parts, and it's highly complicated. You've got the White House, you've got Office of Management and Budget, you got Congress, right? And so trying to get things done in that environment is complicated, to say the least, even for folks who have the very, very best intentions and would
That's
love to
right.
see something that's fantastic. And so we always assume positive intent, right? I
It's
learned
just
that
what I
all
was going
these
to
these
say,
folks are,
Grady. Right?
yeah. And
Assume
so
that
I think
everyone
if
who's
you're,
sitting in that bureaucratic hands, that bureaucratic chair, not giving you what you need to be able to help them, that their
yep.
hands are tied and that they went into that job with the best intentions and the system ate them up and spit them out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really
Yeah.
why, we founded Disasters IO, was to build this, given, the fact that we understand the constraints that folks have
Yeah.
in DC or, in the regional offices or in Sacramento on what they can do and how they can move levers and things like that. How do we build technology that makes that easier for the end user, given those complexities, right? And so we really see
Yeah.
ourselves as a force multiplier for those folks who we are less constrained in terms of how we build, what we build, all those sorts of things than you are when you're in a Department of Homeland Security technology procurement environment. And so bringing that knowledge that we have and the expertise that we have of how those things function and translating that into intuitive, easy to use software platforms is really helping them achieve that goal ultimately, right? Because at the end of the day, the goal is to help communities respond effectively and recover quickly, and help communities when they most need help. That mission, and everybody there, lives by that. And, oftentimes their hands are just tied in the best way to go about that, right? If
Right.
we had kind of a clean sheet of paper. And so, how can we in the private sector, understanding that, help them better achieve that mission, and help the customer, get on with their life, and help their communities become more resilient.
So if 120% of the focus is on disaster response and rebuilding, resilience after the fact, what chance in hell does the prevention pre-mitigation movement have?
I mean, I think that
Because
there's,
because you're not a hero because you went into the woods and you trimmed trees, or you took some dead limbs down, or you what like or you raked leaves or whatever. Like, no one's going to vote for you for that. They're going to vote for you because you responded to a huge disaster with an unlimited budget and really cool tools. So
absolutely,
and
but
so
it's
we're willing to
and
spend endless. What?
yeah, that's certainly a problem, right? The checkbook is much less restricted in the disaster response and recovery phases than it is in the prevention phase. But I think there's many pieces to play here, right? So you had Frank Freevault of the Western Fire Chiefs Association on an earlier podcast, right? And Frank and the team at the Western Fire Chiefs Association have been just tremendous advocates on understanding the fire science as it relates to structures and conflagration within subdivisions and things like that, identifying science-backed best practices for home hardening,
Yep.
and how you incorporate some of those models into building codes and into everything from insurance, right? So the insurance companies in California in particular have traditionally been restricted from using predictive modeling and taking into account, or they didn't take into account what your structure type was. It just said your house is here and therefore your policy premium is X, right? And
Right.
California, with the support of the academic community and the insurance companies, either willing or unwillingly, depending on what side of the or what entity it is, and where they're at in their process, has really been focused on making sure that um, they're forcing insurance companies to say, hey, if I replace my wood shingled roof with a metal roof, I get a premium reduction for that, right? And I
Right.
think people kind of underestimate the power of really the private sector, and unfortunately, capitalism, and changing those behaviors and adjusting kind of where people live, how they're building, and ultimately how they're recovering. So there's a ton of work to go on
Yeah.
that front. I think that there should be far more money that's available in the form of grants and things like that. California has been piloting Cal OES with Cal Fire, have been piloting a home hardening program in a number of counties that aims to do just that, provide funding to homeowners to harden their structures. And I think that that's going to continue to be a model as we go forward. And ultimately, there's going to be places as well where we just say, hey, it's not. I know it's beautiful here, but it's just not suited for humans, unfortunately. And
Come
the
for a day
insurance
hike.
companies
Don't build
are
your house here. Right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that'll
Exactly.
keep continue
Wow.
to happen.
Well, Grady, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing and how you're doing it. How you've taken your
Likewise.
background, and um, been and how you've been so foolish as to think that you could do a startup company in a government space. We're both in that idiot club. Because we want to make the difference, and so really hats off to you for that. Uh, Hair's already off to you.
Well,
But
mine's going as well.
yeah, it's a brave endeavor, and but a worthwhile one, and hopefully some of us get through, and make a difference. I recommend accelerator programs.
Yeah,
I went through TechStars. You got TechStars, you got the Y Combinator, but these things are really helpful in introducing you to people who can push the needle a little bit.
yeah, most definitely. I think that's really the most important thing is we are here to change outcomes on the ground and help
Yep.
communities, and that's really the founding principle of Disasters IO. And fortunate to be in the Bay Area in San Francisco, surrounded by large network of folks who are in GovTech and investors who are wanting to see those changes as well. And so it's really just about making sure that you're keeping in touch and leveraging those relationships and connections to continue to drive the mission forward, and always saying yes, right?
Yeah, that's right. And being in San Francisco is great for you because it puts you in a community of people who also believe that uh, that data douses fires. Um, you know, and to some degree, right, it's helpful. And I'm trying to split that fence to say, you actually need some machines that put out the fires too,
Yeah,
and they have to integrate. It's like you can't have airplanes without having the flight control systems, right?
absolutely.
So
Well,
it'll
I
all
mean,
come together.
I think the Northern California Bay Area has really been on the bits and bytes and software focus, but
Yep.
there's huge, very interesting things happening in hardware in Southern California, right? And so
Right.
that's the beauty about being in this state is we've got a little bit of both, and just a
Yep.
diverse amount of opportunity and folks who are foolish enough to think that they could change the world, right?
That's right. And no finger pointing. The only faults you mentioned was the San Andreas one. So otherwise everyone's doing the best they can.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Great. Grady, what an amazing hour plus we spent together. And I hope you'll come back on the fire break and we can continue this conversation. I, I think there's a lot to be gained from it.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me, Steve. It was an absolute pleasure to be here, and look forward to collaborating with you in the near future.
I suspect that this podcast will be followed with a phone call on how we work together.
Let's do
Uh,
it. I'd love it.
so, so I hope your line is open there.
Always.
All right, folks. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this hour with Grady Joseph as much as I did, because I'm going to be listening to this podcast just to hear again what he had to say when I'm not busy trying to think about what to ask him next. Said you guys didn't have to do that, so hopefully you caught it all on the first pass. Uh, anyway, thanks so much for joining me here on the fire break, and I look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Take care.